White text over video of past events. Logo, Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. Professional Development Series presents Lead Conference, Share Out 2022. At left, presentation slides. At top right, mini video of presenting speaker. Below, an ASL interpreter signs.
Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome, thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome to Lead Conference Share Out 2022 with CCAC. This event is being recorded and will be shared with registrants once available. My name is Bill Green. I'm a member of the CCAC Steering Committee. I'm a middle-aged white man with glasses, dark beard and hair. I'm wearing a white shirt with navy stripes, and I'm sitting in my home's basement. Let's go to the next slide, please. For those of you who maybe are unfamiliar with the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, our mission is to empower Chicago's cultural spaces to become more accessible to visitors with disabilities. There are 4 primary pillars central to our work, and those include free professional development workshops, like the one that you're attending today, an accessible equipment loan program, an accessible event calendar, and our growing statewide network. For more information about all these programs, please visit chicagoculturalaccess.org. I'm going to hand it off to my co-moderator, Zhen Heinemann.
Hi, everybody. My name is Zhen Heinemann. I use they and she pronouns. I am a Chicago Cultural Accessibility Steering Committee member, white person with big gold frame aviator glasses, large green headphones, gray-black hair in a top knot on top of my head, and a lanyard and white blouse inside my office at the Chicago Cultural Center with a lot of colorful things hanging on the wall. So accessibility is a priority to us, and for our program today, we are including real-time captioning provided by Efficiency Reporting, as well as ASL interpretation provided by Faith Interpreting. If you'd like to see the ASL interpreter, you may choose to pin them by clicking on the 3 dots at the corner of their image, and we especially recommend pinning if you are using a mobile device. You can also utilize gallery view and know that the ASL interpreters will be spotlighted. If you would like to view the captions in a separate browser, you can do so using the stream text link included in the chat. We encourage you to submit questions for our presenters using the chat function. I'll be monitoring that and dumping them into a document, and we'll get to them at the end of our presentation. And if you have any issues with accessibility, please don't hesitate to reach out to our support team via that same chat. And in case you find the chat's pop-ups bothersome, you can turn off the show chat previews by clicking the caret next to the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'm going to turn it back to Bill and go to the next slide.
Thank you so much, Jen. This is Bill Green speaking again. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with what the LEAD conference is, or if you're just wanting a refresher on what it is, LEAD is an annual conference. This year it was held in Raleigh, North Carolina. Next year it'll be held in Boston. It was the first week of August this year. LEAD is an acronym for Leadership Exchange in Arts and Disability Conference. It is put on every year by the Kennedy Center's Department for Education. The LEAD conference provides opportunities for arts and cultural professionals to develop accessibility, best practices, and resources, engage in conversations with colleagues and experts from around the world, and learn practical methods for designing inclusive art experiences and environments. It's really a conference that's designed for all levels, for those organizations that are just beginning on accessibility, or for those people who consider themselves or have expertise in the area. There are speakers and sessions that really cover that gamut, from talking about how to begin accessibility in your organization, then more specific about creating spaces for specific disability communities. The conference itself is an accessible experience. There is a fee available associated with it, but there are scholarships. So if you're interested, I would recommend going onto the Kennedy Center's website. They have information about the conference. You can sign up for updates and about scholarships. And there is, again, when you're signing up for it, there's great information about accessibility when you're attending, what's available as far as ASL interpretation, large print, etc. And I'm very happy that the people who are going to be presenting today all attended. Some of them even presented, which is nice to say. So let's go ahead and go to our next slide, and I can introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Lauren Pincus. Lauren is the Accessibility Coordinator at Chicago Humanities Festival. Then Zhen Heinemann, Director of Visitor Experiences and Public Engagement at Chicago's Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. And then Bill Green, myself, the Hart Prince Fund Accessibility and Inclusion Manager at Lincoln Park Zoo. And our last speaker will be Dave Becker, Senior Manager of Learning Experiences at Brookfield Zoo. And for that first speaker, Zhen, I'll hand it back to you for an introduction.
Thanks, Bill. This is Zhen, everyone. Our first speaker is going to be Lauren Pincus, and her presentation will be presented via an audio recorded message. Next slide, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Pincus, and I am the Audience Accessibility Coordinator at Chicago Humanities Festival. I had the pleasure of attending LEAD through CHF, and I'm really excited to tell you all what I've learned. This was my first time attending LEAD, so of course, I came back and I wanted to implement everything I learned. I knew that wouldn't be possible, so I was able to figure out the most important and most doable tasks that I could implement for the fall season at CHF. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be at this presentation, but happy that I could record myself and give you all some insight into my LEAD experience. If you have any questions that I am unfortunately unable to answer right now, please don't hesitate to email me at lpincus@chicagoculturalaccess.org. All right, let's get started.
Next slide, please.
Okay, so Lauren's exciting LEAD takeaways. What does that mean? Well, going into LEAD, I had a goal for myself for CHF, and it was to focus on disability communities that we are not adhering to. So what that means is we are not seeing a big audience base from the blind, low vision communities, and we are not getting really any sensory-friendly requests. So I really wanted to try to figure out how we can make this happen for CHF. And with that, I went to a workshop called Experience Design for visitors who are blind or low vision. The first thing that was said was ADA compliant does not mean user friendly, and that stuck with me throughout the whole conference, and I just knew I was in the right place with the right people at that moment. At this workshop, Clover Nook Center for the Blind was who presented, and they are currently, with the help of grants, providing free services for Braille production, which is really awesome, and I thought going into this, Braille would be something that we would have to implement at CHF later down the line, but knowing that this was free, I jumped on that opportunity. And I'll explain more what that looks like in the next slides. Another takeaway that I went was, again, sensory friendly. So I went to Self Advocates Perspective Roles for Sensory Friendly Programs Development. And in this workshop, what was really an important thing that I took away is that you don't need to change everything for a sensory inclusive event. And what that means is, you think relaxed performance is something different, right? So that is changing the music maybe, or getting rid of a spectacle that may have been in a show. And with sensory inclusive event, it's very different. And so with this, you're really just, especially at CHF, we have a lot of events that are two people sitting on stage. We have such an array of different events happening throughout Chicago. It goes from book interviews to music. And so when I was thinking about what that meant for CHF, I was thinking, well, at our book interviews, we already are pretty sensory inclusive, right? We have no spectacle. We have two people on stage. and there's not a lot happening. So it's really up to us to talk to the customers and see what can do better for next time, right? And the next thing was make sensory bags unique to your organization, which, again, were so different. I was really struggling how we could make this happen. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. All right, so in implementing all of these new things that I learned at CHF, I reached out to Clovernook instantly, and I really let them know, we want to do Braille business cards for our audience services full-time team. We want to do Braille program guides. We get our program guides, and I really wanted to have those options for our customers. And then with tactile book cover, what that means is, since we do book interviews, I wanted to provide a tactile resource. And so Clovernook actually has the ability in their production studios, they have the ability to raise pictures. And I thought that was really neat. So I used that, and I actually sent them one of the book covers that we are going to be presenting this season, and they have been working on that book cover and raising it so it becomes its tactile experience. And in the other workshop about sensory-friendly programs, the biggest thing I took away from it was more training, right? More training is so important, especially when you're working with so many different types of people. So for CHF, I want to make sure that we get that training for sensory inclusive events and make sure that we are aware of how we talk to people and understand that, these neurodivergent disabilities can be invisible. And so having that training could really help our staff feel more comfortable when talking to customers. And with the sensory bags, I decided to have two. So we have the music sensory bag and the book sensory bag. The music sensory bag will include some musical instruments, kind of like kid musical instruments. They do not make any noise. And it's just to have that tactile feeling of using the instrument. We will still have our sensory toys, our fidget spinners, our tangles, our spiky balls, all of that, but I'm adding a little bit more to it. And with our book sensory bag, we're going to actually just use old books of CHF that we've interviewed before, these authors, and they're going to be able to, just go through the books and have that tactile experience with the book. That's really what I'm doing for CHF and what I'm implementing and what I got from LEAD. For the last slide, the challenges I am seeing is growing our customer base. It really is something that I am pursuing, outreach, partnerships, and it's hard. It's hard to get people to come and trust us that we will have those accommodations for people. And that kind of leads into my next thing, creating events that are fully accessible. That would be the dream, right? That we enter an event and it has your accommodations there for you. Now at CHF, we've already started doing that with open caption. We try to open caption most of our events. We have more than half being open caption this season, and we're very lucky to have that budget for it. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we also were able to include ASL interpreters, audio describers? And so that's something that I foresee a challenge, because every organization has a budget we have to abide by. And yes, we have an accessibility line in our budget, which we're so lucky to have, but that will consistently be something that I will hope to strive for in the next 5 to 10 years. And then touch tours. Since we rent out venues throughout Chicago, it's very hard to implement a touch tour, and I'm still toying with the idea of how we can do that. We really do only have 2 people on stage at times. So how can we present a touch tour that is exciting, right? We don't have costumes to present. We don't have actors to be in their characters, so it's much harder. to have a touch door. And so that's something I am working on, and that's our challenges. Well, that is all I have for my experience at LEAD. I want to thank you all for listening to me. And again, if you have questions, please reach out to me. And I now pass it on to Zhen. Thank you. Bye.
Great. Hi, this is Bill speaking again. Thank you, Lauren, for sharing out. And I will also say, I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in Clovernook, the resource that Lauren shared. You can find a link to that in the chat. Our next speaker is Zhen Heinemann. Zhen is a CCAC steering committee member, immersive experience artist and director of visitor experience at the public engagement at City of Chicago's Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. I also had the great pleasure of attending her lightning talk at this year's LEAD conference. Please, Zhen.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, everybody. This is Zhen speaking. I did do a lightning talk at LEAD about aesthetics and accessibility. If you'd like to know more about that, feel free to contact me at zheinemann@gmail.com. zheinemann@gmail.com. But for now, let's talk about LEAD. Next slide, please. Something that I really appreciated about LEAD in general, before I get into specifics, is that an overall theme was feeling expected. So I think that we struggle with that sometimes for our audiences, to make people feel expected and to not wait until a crisis occurs as a catalyst to change. That's another phrase that I heard at LEAD. Don't wait until crisis occurs to be the catalyst to change. So both of those things, I think, are high-level thoughts that I can leave you with from the LEAD experience as we move forward. All right, so I attended a lot of different talks, panels about museum experience, because here I work a lot in the Chicago Cultural Center, and we consider it a museum as well as a cultural center and general arts and culture destination. And one of the things that I was really interested in learning more about was blind and low vision access in the museum setting. So what I was hearing a lot was that there are many, many, many different ways to go about kind of adding blind and low vision access. There's touch tours, like Lauren was just speaking about, but there's also carts, right? A mobile cart that maybe is specific to one idea or subject that you're developing that can be brought out and have people have the experience. A lot of times that's also great for neurodiverse folks. Maquettes, so early designs of sculptures or art pieces that are in a form that people can touch. And folks were talking about wearing gloves to touch those in order to protect them. 3D models that can be printed of books or tablets or pieces of art and all different kinds of things that can be of sculptures that folks can hold and touch, as well as tactile graphics. I learned that in the Clovernook presentation that Lauren was talking about. There's a thing called Swell Touch paper, where you can print the image and the lines of the image will be raised. And so that's a product that they were using. They did talk about how they often have to reduce the complexity of the graphic in order to have that work, but that it's something that can give a sense of the piece of art. And then also having QR codes with Braille markings on them, or at least the corners of them with raised dots, so that people can find them on the page and know where to position their mobile device to scan. And those QR codes can take people to audio description recordings or other audio files or other things that their screen reader can read out loud for them. Also raised maps, having a map with tactile experience, and beacon technology. So beacon technology is like when you go, if you live here in Chicago and you go to get on a CTA bus or train and you use your mobile phone to, swing it in front of the reader and it goes beep. Well, that is beacon technology, sensing that sensor and your phone are communicating. And so unlike with a QR code, where sometimes it's hard for folks to figure out where it is and how to position their machine to find it, the beacon technology means if you're near enough, you get the information. And so overall, the idea was that there's many, many options to try, and just try something. Another series of museum experience moments that I went to here were about print design. And there was a lot of talking about inclusive design standards. A highlight that I would like to share with everybody, because I think it's a great tip, is if you aren't sure that your design has high enough contrast, you just open your computer screen to look at it in grayscale and see if you're able to see the contrast in the grayscale. If you can, it's normally high enough contrast. Another thing about inclusive design that I'll add was adding a texture. So if you have a graphic like a pie chart or a map that has a kind of series of different color spaces or a series of different color elements in the pie chart, if you can add a texture to those, it often helps people with vision disabilities or like color blindness and other things to differentiate the different parts of your graphic. Speaking of inclusive design, it's its own field and design thinking area on its own, but an piece of advice that was given to us was to create an inclusive design advisory group that maybe only meets about 12 hours a year. They would get paid a stipend, but have them kind of get together and look at all the design work that you're planning on doing. Think about the design of your spaces, the design of your exhibitions, all those kind of things, and get feedback from folks that actually have lived experience. All in all, in LEAD, I think that's something that was a high level takeaway for me. And I think for all of us is, of course, always get firsthand experience if you can and pay people for that information. The other sessions that I attended, most of them were focused on training, anti-ableism training, training in general, and just what is ableism, things like that. And something that I took away from that was the use of first-person storytelling. I do want to add that if you can't see me, I see in the chat that you can ensure your Zoom window is in side-by-side gallery view, just to give everybody a heads up about that. So use of first-person storytelling and kind of raising empathy. There was a lot of discussion about kind of the lowering of empathy with the amount of information that we're taking in digitally through news media, things like that, and how empathy is getting maybe harder for people to have. And so that it's helpful to have first-person storytelling. I think if you can, have disability training that's done by folks with disabilities, of course, that's always the best, and you should do that. If not, if you know of people who do disability training who's a person with disability who can't make your training physically, recorded trainings work, but first-person storytelling is always the best way to go. We talked a lot about schedule and regularity as well as who attends. How often do you do these kind of trainings with a certain staff? Is the staff mandatory, or is the staff, kind of able to opt in or out? I think mandatory training is something that we were really hearing is the best thing to advocate for. If you're doing a training that's generally about your space and your programming, making sure that you add disability awareness training into that training is great. We here at the Cultural Center do trainings about 3 to 4 times a year, depending on the content of the season. And we always add the disability awareness training into that training. Anti-ableist. So this is something that we were talking a lot about. And like Bill had said earlier, there's a lot of people at LEAD of all different levels of kind of disability awareness and accessibility awareness. So anti-ableist training in ableism is similar to racism and homophobia, things like that, things where you have an internal bias or potentially an external bias where you are being ableist. So you are kind of thinking in a way that is prioritizing and preferencing people who are able-bodied and are people without disabilities. So a way to kind of understand ableism and teach anti-ableism is to teach the multiple models. So if you go ahead online and look for disability models, you'll see things like the social model or the medical model or the charity model. And once you read about the different models that have been used kind of social thinking wise and medical thinking wise, theory wise about disability, you'll learn more about how to move to an anti-ableist space, and including that in your training is great. Something I also heard about that really stuck with me is people with disabilities being able to attend your space or event and leave with their dignity intact. That Then I also heard one of the groups talking about evaluate, educate, engage, evolve, and then repeat. Next slide. Thank you. So trying next, we're thinking about trying to take reservations for all of our events so that our access needs can be asked for. We normally don't do that as we're free and open to the public, everything we do. But that does not create a system where people have to email us personally and kind of take the time to do all that work. And we're hoping that maybe a reservation system can help us get people information that we might need to get them, but also get information from them about their access needs. We are talking about moving the training from optional. Feel free to join us for this training to mandatory. You must join this training. And then we're talking about access planning with our contracted artists. So aside from just thinking about the audience, I think also thinking about the access needs of your performers, your staff, your volunteers, all of the people that you work with is highly important. Challenges to try over the long term. Setting a department-wide access standard and delivering that at all of our venues and events. And then also to see more diverse disability community representation at cultural events and venues and to normalize that access aesthetic. Thanks, everybody. Before we move on, I just want to remind you that if you have questions so far, feel free to drop them in the chat so that we can address them after the presentation. And I am going to turn it back over to Bill Green, CCAC Steering Committee member, Heart Prince Fund Accessibility and Inclusion Manager at Lincoln Park Zoo, doing great things over there. Bill Green, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jen. Do I need to pause for a moment for pinning, or I'll remind people that it looks like that you could change your view if you want to be able to see the speaker also, but I'll go ahead and next slide, please. So this was also my first time to attend the LEAD conference. I went to, I think, a really wide range of things, and something that I appreciated being from zoo, that there were other organizations there from zoos, aquariums, botanic gardens. There was an affinity group that I attended for institutions with live collections. And so that was really nice to get to see other people working in the same space that I am. But it's always also nice to see other people from museums, live theater, movie theaters, universities, and many other types of organizations that there were. Some of the themes that came up when I was there, and that sort of stood out the most were my main takeaways, had to do around hiring practices. And it was nice to see so much information about the recruiting, interviewing, onboarding, and then also the retention of employees. One thing that we talk about, and I feel like people know, is the idea of undue requirements, but there was a nice emphasis on thinking about not just having those requirements of the excess weight that might need to be carried. Why would a job say that needs to carry 20 pounds when there's never an instance for it to carry 20 pounds? Why would there be the requirement that a job needs to be done standing when it could easily be done seated? Things like that. But also putting information like not requiring driver's license, for example, not requiring, thinking about what actually are the education requirements needed. And a real emphasis also on encouraging people when they apply to put in volunteer experience and not having an applicant be judged or be asked just to give work experience. But a lot of time people in disability community have done a lot of volunteering, and that's where they've got a lot of their kind of workplace experiences from that. So making sure that in the postings, you're encouraging people to share that volunteer experience. Sharing job posts with the disability community, not just posting on a message board, but making those specific asks for things. Talking with people, it's not like there's one website where you know that the disability community is going to be looking for jobs and there's one preference over the other. But a lot of times it's using those connections in the community to share posts, to share job postings, and reaching out to people with personal asks. I thought that was a great advice to really encourage people and get that diverse workforce that you're looking for. Normalizing accommodation requests, making from the beginning that you are normalizing requests having to do with the application process, whether that's receiving or submitting materials in alternative formats, giving accommodations when it comes to information about interviews, onboarding, and continuing for accommodations to be available as someone works. As employees change, as they age, there might be that need for additional accommodations. And making that normalized by making that part of asking everyone who is in all of those steps of the employment, that accommodation requests are available to them. Providing questions, alternative interview strategies. This was one I thought was a great, just kind of concrete one, is that the point was made that why not provide people with questions for their interview ahead of time? And if the reason is for saying that, well, we want to know somebody's kind of off the cuff response or what they will answer thinking on their feet. And then going back and asking, what of these questions or these scenarios or these ideas that you want to get from people, how often is it really something that people are going to be having to think on their feet about, as opposed to times when they're going to have to problem solve and have time to think about that it's not going to need that immediate solution. So letting that interview process kind of mirror that, and not just assuming that you're going to need to get everybody's like kind of off the cuff response in those interviews, but providing questions ahead of time. Providing clear path to success in advance. So the idea of thinking about what are you providing more than just the job, right? When you're presenting to a community of people with disabilities, a job posting, that you're thinking beyond the job. What is that path to success and advancement in the job? What else is available? Are there affinity groups or accessibility groups available in the workforce? Making that clear from the beginning, from the application process. Something else I attended was co-collaboration. It's something that Lincoln Park Zoo, that we're in the middle of right now, co-collaborating with disability communities to produce interpretive elements. So I was really interested to see this. And a lot of it talked about standardizing co-collaboration, that whether you're creating new interpretive elements like we are, you're thinking about infrastructure, communications, whether those are paper or digital materials that are going out, that it becomes just a regular and integrated part of the evaluation process, that people with disabilities are invited to give feedback and are included in that process from the beginning. And then also implementation of an access plan into a strategic plan, which I want to lead that into. One of the organizations that was there that I thought was particularly interesting was the Palo Alto Junior Museum and Zoo. And they were starting with accessibility. This zoo was redone when their accessibility plan and the strategic plan were made at the same time. So in doing that, they started with accessibility and were able to actually talk about that accessibility in their interpretive signage. So let's go to the next slide, please. So some of the things I want to take away from is definitely that increase of disability represented in our employment pool, and using some of those things to reach out and increase that. I know that there's a real interest at Lincoln Park Zoo to always have a diverse workforce. It's just a matter of making sure that we are truly reaching out to people in the disability community. And then share how collaboration, so share how collaboration with partners with disabilities have shaped and informed the guest experience. So not only including and collaborating with people with disability, but making sure that when people are visiting the zoo, that there's interpretive signage that tells what accessibility elements are there and that show that the people in the disability community had impact in the guest experience. So those were my main takeaways. I'm gonna go to the next slide, please. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our last speaker, Dave Becker. is the Senior Manager of Learning Experiences at Brookfield Zoo. And I also had the pleasure of attending one of his lightning talks that talked about the great inclusive work that he's doing at Brookfield. So Dave, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Bill. This was also my first time at the LEAD conference, and it was really exciting to be there. First of all, as Bill said, my name is Dave Becker. I use he, his pronouns. I am a 60-year-old white male with blonde graying hair. Today I'm wearing a gray patterned shirt and a navy blue jacket, and I'm in at my home. So LEAD was very exciting. One of the things that was really impressive about being at LEAD is that accessibility is normalized at a LEAD conference. And so I don't know that I've been in a space where so many accommodations were just regularly available as a matter of course, and that there was such a wide variety of people with a range of disabilities, not only as participants, but as leaders. And then there was a range of, as Bill had mentioned, a range of different types of organizations, but also a great range of diversity in where people were on their own accessibility journey, from organizations that were just beginning to think about accessibility and how to bring it into their organization, and to people who were really on the cutting edge that you could look at and go, oh my gosh, that's where we would like to head. And then many of us that are somewhere in between. The sessions that I wanted to highlight today, there were so many good sessions, but I wanted to highlight today two sessions that focused on institution-wide planning. I would also, like Bill, saw what the work that the Palo Alto Junior Museum and Zoo were doing, and that whole ability to integrate accessibility planning with master planning and strategic planning was really impressive. So I'm hoping that that's something that can be true for us since we're moving into that process. And one of the reasons why I wanted to look at institution-wide. So the first session that I went to that was related to institution-wide accessibility planning used the framework of a toolbox and said, you know, rather than thinking about all of the different types of disabilities, thinking about the range of services that go into this toolbox, what might be available, and thinking about how to just gradually increase each of these areas. So not necessarily thinking I'm going to do all of these areas perfectly all at once. So the areas that they broke the presentation into, there were 12 areas, kind of resource areas: assistive listening, sign language, captioning, audio description, Braille and large print, tactile resources, wayfinding, physical access to places and spaces, but also furnishings, the furniture, what makes the furniture itself accessible. Looking at emergency procedures, are our emergency procedures taking accessibility into account? And thinking about how we would respond to people with disabilities in any of our emergency situations and making sure that that's built into our procedures. Staff interventions and exhibit design. So what they were suggesting is that, you know, picking one or more of these areas, doing a bit of a deep dive, and then adding more, you know, continuing to add more. And if you weren't sure where to start, one of the presenters, Betty Siegel, who's the director of accessibility and director of the VSA International, is that the first and best foundation for access services is your staff. She said for the Kennedy Center, when they do their evaluations, one of the things that always comes up are comments about people's interactions with the ushers. And that's always rated very highly. So the work that they do with ushers and frontline staff is greatly important. Next slide, please. So the other presentation that I went to on the institution-wide planning talked about thinking about creating a planning framework that had 3 stages of starting with an audit, then developing a plan based on that audit, and then beginning to coordinate how that plan was put into place, starting to implement that plan. And the audit was broken down into 5 different categories, thinking about what are the sensory experiences as well as the sensory barriers, and that the audit should look at both barriers as well as strengths in each of these areas. So what are the sensory barriers and what are the sensory strengths for the organization? Same thing with mobility. What are the barriers? What are the strengths? On a cognitive level, what are the barriers for how we approach the space or the experience cognitively? What are some of the supports that could be used? What are we doing well? Communication, thinking about the ranges and types of communication that are available to a wide range of people and a wide range of disabilities. What are our barriers? For not only receiving communication, but being able to communicate in return, and where are our strengths. And the last one, psychological, thinking about our own emotional and mental health needs at any given time, and how those can be impacted in our visit to our institutions. Where are our barriers, where are our strengths? And this plan is actually, one version of this plan is fleshed out by one of the presenters, Scott Artley, who's with the Metro Regional Arts Council of Minnesota, has a free online planning workbook. And the website for that workbook is included in the resources that will be available in the chat. And one of the things that one of the presenters at this session said that just stuck with me is, she said, Elizabeth Ralston, who's an accessibility consultant, said that access isn't the step that we add, it's the step that we missed. So often we can think of these things as additive. Next slide, please. So I'm hoping for us at CZS, as I mentioned, we're right at the Chicago Zoological Society, which is the organization that operates Brookfield Zoo. We are right at the start of a master planning process and at the start of a strategic planning process. And so I'm really hoping to promote the idea of let's also integrate an accessibility plan into those processes. There's a lot that we've been doing in piloting and prototyping in different corners and areas of the zoo. But our next step, I think, is really to go zoo wide. And then one of the areas that I felt really good about and felt really affirmed in is all of the sessions that Zhen was talking about that just emphasized staff training, which is something we've been focusing on quite a bit within our organization, and an area that we'll continue to focus on, thinking about staff training as a key component of our toolbox. Next slide, please. And so I want to close both my part of the presentation as well as just our panel with some of the other resources that are available through LEAD and through VSA International. So if you're not, obviously all of us, we really enjoyed the conference. And if you're able to get to the conference, get there. And there's a wide variety of resources that are available through LEAD. And this will also be included in the resources section on the chat. But there is a LEAD listserv for continuing these types of conversations. They're very active on social media with a Facebook account, a Twitter account, and an Instagram. But there's also, if you go to the LEAD website, there are a range of webinars, of tip sheets, of books, videos, and archives of past workshops. And there are different levels of memberships that are available. And we also through CCAC also have some of these same types of resources, and we'll say more about that at the end. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bill and to Zhen for our question and answer period. Thank you, everyone.
Next slide, Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dave. This is Bill talking again. Thank you to Dave and to all our speakers. Zhen, did you have, I know you've been keeping watch on the questions coming in the chat. And I also encourage, if anyone is interested in coming off mute and asking a question, we welcome that. I would request that if you want to do that, use the hand raised gesture so that we're able to call on you easily. But Zhen, you want to start us with our first question?
This is Zhen and I am ready. Bill, the first question is for you. What partners have you worked with to collaborate with, and how does that model work?
So it's a long question, a long answer, but I think the short answer is that we've collaborated with people in disability communities in Chicago, reaching out to different organizations and to individuals, beginning with input sessions to related specifically to interpretive elements, how people sort of approach, interact, and exit those interpretive elements, whether they be physical, digital, and then the long-term process is taking people who were in those sessions and partnering with them to make new interpretive installations. And it's been about a year that we've been on that. There's 2 to 3 more years on that process. So I don't know if that's a great answer because there's so many things to talk about, but it does kind of to tease. I believe in February, we're going to be doing, LEAD's going to be doing a presentation about co-collaboration with disability communities, where I'll be able to talk more about that. But the model has worked out great, and we have learned a ton of things. So much information has already informed practices that we're doing at the zoo that had no relationship to interpretive elements. We've learned a lot from that. So those input sessions with the disability community have been extremely informative, and I highly would recommend that for any cultural institution.
Thanks, Bill. This is Zhen. Our second question is for the presenters. What is your sales pitch for people new to LEAD who are considering attending for the first time next year? And my sales pitch is, if you can afford it or can get a scholarship and the time to go, go. You will definitely learn something. You will meet new people to increase your network and who are more than willing to talk to you about questions that you have later on, to tell you about what they're doing. Everybody is very ready to connect, and I thought it was just a great time.
I think you're right on. And I would say too to anybody is that to encourage them, that we said is that there is something there for everybody. So if you're if you're interested and you think, I'm not sure what my institution or what I might know, or if I don't know enough, or I know a lot about these, I think there is something there for everybody.
This is Zhen. Dave, do you have a sales pitch?
Sorry, yes, I would echo that. The variety of presentations and the variety of organizations, you're going to find at least one thing that you connect with, but you will connect with more than one.
This is Zhen. Our third question is, what amount of time what amount of time do you set aside to train programming staff, part-time or temporary, on how to use the accessibility tools you have available? We train our staff about 2 to 3 times a year. Sometimes that's depending on space. Sometimes there's space-specific trainings. And we do about 45 minutes to an hour. It also includes other things aside from just about the equipment. And I would say it's never enough. I feel like it also helps to have redundant things like printed materials that they can have on hand near where they will be sitting or standing. you know, a website that they can refer back to, a video that they can watch later of the training so that they can refer back to it. Because people forget things, and it also depends on how often they're asked for things, how kind of much that it stays in the front of their mind.
Well, we have about a standard, about a 75-minute training that everybody takes when they start. In addition to that, I'll do about an hour onboarding with people, but then there's like in our internal communications, there's constant updates on things, resources being shared out with people, and then just other departments as needed. There's additional trainings too. So it's such a, I feel like it becomes such a job specific thing, because when you have people who are doing everything from like security and food service to well, like raising money, you know, in development, things like that. We have such a wide range of things that it becomes so dependent on what people are needing at the time that I wish I had a really good standard answer for it, but it's kind of like when somebody needs it, I'll do it. Whenever, whatever it is, I'll do it. So
we're in the process of just really revamping our training and really thinking about, you know, what's that kind of intro level training that everybody needs to have, and then who needs more than that. Especially in some of our education teams or some of our other teams find that, you know, it's not just a one-time guest experience kind of interaction, but sometimes we're interacting with the same person over years of time. And so want to develop a different level of expertise for some of our staff.
Jen, our fourth question is, were there any captioning software options discussed at LEAD? Some theaters have used a free software for scripted captioning that has never been updated, and we're looking. This is Jen. I will continue by saying, I didn't find this information at LEAD, and I will mention that I'm holding up the LEAD booklet for one of the hours of time. There are about 8 sessions per segment that you could choose to go to, and I didn't specifically go to things about captioning, but what we've found and what I've heard people saying, not in a panel or something, but just around, is that the new version of PowerPoint has auto captions that are pretty good if you have a good enough mic hearing things. And so some people in certain circumstances are using PowerPoint if they can open a slide show and play that on a screen while feeding the mic in, they are able to get auto captions that way.
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know a good answer for that. So.
And this is Jen. We might just not have been the team that did a lot of captioning. There were captioning and ASL sessions that I did not attend. I do know that Commissioner Rachel Arfa from the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities attended quite a few of those. I'm going to move on to the next. And Karen dropped a note in the chat. Karen says, or Karen is addressing a question that was asked in the chat that is, can you ballpark us an estimate of how much attending LEAD might cost? Understanding that costs might be different year to year, of course, and that the person can't seem to find it on their website. I will say as a presenter, I had a slightly discounted cost, but aside from the cost of just attending the conference, which I think might be around $300, maybe.
I think it was $325 or $370. I was just trying to. I was actually looking for that in my email at the moment. It was either $325 or $375 for the conference, and then the conference center was attached to a hotel. If you stay there, it was that hotel was like $170 a night. But,
right. So I was also thinking that this is Jen. The consideration is also that you have to travel to wherever the conference might be and find lodging and food. So.
This is Bill again. I would say definitely sign up for the reminders, and they give information ahead of time about getting those scholarships. I know for sure there were people who were attending who were students at universities studying accessibility or studying museum services things, and so I feel like that was a lot of the students were going on scholarship. I think other people were too. So I'd highly recommend connecting to the LEAD listserv for that and for other great resources they share on that. And a LEAD membership for a year is included when you do the sign up for the conference, but on its own, a LEAD membership is like $15 for a year.
I'm going to do
Right.
one last question
Yeah,
for
about
us
time.
before we wrap up. And the question is, who was in the audience? Any artists or all administrators? Estimate the percentage of people with disabilities. I will say that I know in my sessions that there were administrators, there were artists, there were local, state, and regional kind of government workers. There were folks who are on the artistic side of museums as well as on the administration side of museums, social media folks. And so it really seemed like there was a really wide range of people. There were people who were the, kind of executive director level all the way to interns. So that is, there was a big range, and I wouldn't necessarily be able to say that I could estimate the percentage of people with disabilities, especially considering that there's a fair amount of non-apparent disabilities that, were probably present at LEAD, but it was a space where I was happy to see so many folks with apparent disabilities and so many services built into the conference right off the bat, that people were able to have the support that they needed without even having to really ask or follow up and kind of do a lot of legwork.
I totally agree with that. I think it's nice to see the different people, and that some people, their organization sent them to LEAD with the job of figure out what accessibility is all about. That was exciting too, that they were getting to start on that. So I think with that, I will say thank you to everybody for attending. We appreciate you being here. Please again, check out chicagoculturalaccess.org for more information about CCAC. Thank you to all of our speakers today, to our service providers, to everyone on CCAC who provided support behind the scenes, and most of all to co-moderator Jen. Thank you all.
And just to add to that, thank you, Bill, and thank you, Zhen. Thank you also to our, I think you mentioned this already, Bill, to our interpreters. But I want to make sure that everybody marks their calendar for Friday, October 14th, which is our next event. It's the CCAC's annual social event. So save the date. More information to come on that. Thank you, everyone.
Credits appear. White text on black background. LEAD Conference Share Out 2022. Presented by Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium. For workshop resources and more information, visit chicagoculturalaccess.org. Presenting speakers: Bill Green, Hart Prins Fund Accessibility and Inclusion Manager at Lincoln Park Zoo. Zhen Heinemann, Director of Visitor Experience and Public Engagement at the City of Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. Lauren Pincus, Audience Accessibility Coordinator at the Chicago Humanities Festival. Dave Becker, Senior Manager of Learning Experiences at the Chicago Zoological Society, Brookfield Zoo. Workshop Accessibility, Efficiency Reporting, Real-Time Captioning, Faith Interpreting, ASL Interpretation, Video Editing, Captioning, and Audio Description by BridgetMelton.com.